Welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. I have the very beautiful Patricia Kara with us today, and you might remember her from Deal or No Deal with Howie Mandel. She was Suitcase #9. She also has a wonderful new book out just the last 6 months. It's called Dream On, Now Deliver. And it's really a step-by-step guide. It's very interesting. I've never seen anything like it for how to get into the entertainment the business, the ins and outs of it. Sort of the backstory of the very basic things you want to know, and then a lot of insight as you continue to grow in your career. So I think you want to take a look at this book. But that's not all of Patricia's story. She has an incredible journey of survival, and that's what I want to talk about today. Thank you. Hey.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, which we were at Fort Lauderdale drinking wine together.
That sounds really good right about now.
Yeah. I kind of want to dive into the middle for just a minute because I think people are so fascinated. You know, you've had this really long career in Hollywood. You've done all kinds of hostings. You've done some of the biggest commercial work that there is to be done with the biggest brands, and then you got the gig on Deal or No Deal, which made everybody in the nation knew who you were, and your face was just sort of everywhere. But I wanted to start with, we talked about once, I think maybe you were about 14 years old and the youngest of 3 daughters.
Yes.
Living in Chicago with a single mom.
Yes.
How did you start this? How did you get into this business? There was nobody around you pushing you, mentoring you?
No, it was just, I knew at a young age, even by 5 years old, when people would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say singer and a dancer. Can't sing to save my life.
Good dream, though.
Yeah, I love dancing. I did become a dancer for a short period of time.
You've got the legs.
Thank you. My mom was legs. And then by the time I was a teenager, people would bring up modeling, and I would see the magazines and TV, and so it piqued my interest. I didn't know how to go about it, so I have one of my older sisters helped me where we pulled out the yellow pages and we started looking up modeling agencies. And we would just talk to a lot of different people and just ask the questions on where do we begin? So that was my process. It was trial and error along the way. And one thing just kind of led to the next,
Which, if it's right, that tends to happen, don't you think?
Yes, agree.
It starts to just kind of domino if it's really what it's supposed to be aligned for your life.
I agree. And you learn along the way and you figure things out, and it doesn't always go smoothly. And obviously, as a teenager, I didn't know what I was doing. But again, luckily, I had a sister who was willing to find out with me. And I just knew there had to be more out there. Mm-hmm. And I knew long term I wanted to be in the entertainment business. I just didn't know exactly who, what, where, when. So it was just a matter of figuring it out.
I mean, I find that really astonishing. It was before social media. I mean, Instagram was not around for you to look up, who's the best agent or where the commercials being made. And you were Chicago definitely has its amount of film business, but it's not like being in LA or New York where it's really part of the fabric of, the industries there. So I just have to kind of go back a little deeper. You gave me a really nice answer, but that's like, how did you have the drive? You were so young. You didn't come from a wealthy family.
No.
How did you have the drive to just go, I'm going for this?
I think there was a lot of drama around me growing up. We didn't have my money. My mom was, like you said, a single woman. She was abused. She had gone through a lot of traumatic things. Coming from Greece, didn't know the language, didn't have family. There was just a lot going on, and but just seeing all the drama, I knew there had to be something more, something different, something better out there, and I wanted to figure it out and learn and live it. And over time I did, and I would always think about sharing that with my family, sharing those moments. But it was definitely tough. It wasn't easy. I think kind of getting away from the drama and doing this helped me in so many ways. Being in the entertainment business, I think it saved me in a sense of not always thinking about the bad. I was searching for the good, and it was good. But again, the bad came into play over time.
I mean, I don't know that at 14, because I have in some ways a similar story where in art, my creativity was my salvation,
Yeah.
And so what I hear you saying to me is, without maybe knowing it at 14 it was your way out.
Yes,
You know,
definitely.
you had a huge drive for a very young girl, but what was driving you was this really difficult.
I would look around me and see we lived in a very Greek neighborhood. So to me, it didn't feel like a big city, Chicago. It felt like the village in Greece because everybody knew everything that was going on. Everybody was, just knew your story or had an idea of everything going on. I just felt like deep down, I just felt like there had to be more. I didn't understand what that meant, but I was like, I don't want to be here living the same life that I just saw a lot of bad around me that I didn't want that. I'm like, there has to be something better. There has to be more. I want happiness. So I kept striving. And I would look at my mom and what she went through that it drove me even more to just do better. And
Backtrack there because that's a great tool. What did your mom go through?
well, like I said, she came from a different country. There definitely was abuse. My father left before I was even born, and he didn't just leave her. He brutally abused her. She was pregnant to me at 6 months pregnant, and she almost lost me, and she fought hard. She fought hard for all of us. I actually feel a little lucky compared to my sisters, and I've talked about that with you before, where I didn't see that abuse. I knew the stories,
And that's different.
and it is different. So I feel for my two older sisters that had to witness it. I feel
were
like,
imprinted.
yeah, and they were young. I mean, they were at that point 8 and 12 years old, and it had gone on for a while prior to that. So that's a long time to see that kind of abuse. For me, it definitely affected my life as I went on, but not to the same degree. So I was always very, like being the baby, I was always very protective of everybody because I knew the stories and I knew what my mom had gone through. And I did later on witness more things happening. So it just, I was very protective of my sisters and my mom, and eventually my sister had kids and protective of them. And so I always felt like I needed to be the protector for everybody. I felt like I just had to be the one. And they, some of the family members did protect me as well, but there was something different. I felt like everybody was going through such a hard time. They were trying to figure out their own thing. I would look at what didn't work and go, I want the opposite of that. I have to find better. I have to do better. And again, it wasn't easy because I was such a young kid. But I think being in the entertainment business and searching for more and leaving Chicago eventually helped me because I knew there was a whole world out there that we knew nothing about. We were just here in Chicago in this bubble, in this Greek neighborhood. So I needed to find out what else was out there. And that helped tremendously. And I would come back home and try to teach that to my family or show them and include them in certain things. They didn't quite understand everything because they weren't part of my everyday life, moving away. But there were things they got to enjoy, but there were definitely still hard times. I just chose to try to keep distancing over time because it took a while. I mean, as a teen, I started in the business and was going through everything, but I didn't finally move till like 23, 24 years old. But I would leave as often as I could and come back, and then it would be the same old thing of a lot of drama, a lot of tragedy, where I was like, does this ever get better? There were times when I was a lot younger where I would say, does it get better? Is this the way life is? I don't understand. Then why are we in this life if it's always this bad? Because it was always like another tragedy, another thing that would just keep happening that I was like, then what's the point? What's the point of life? Where's the goodness? I just didn't understand. So I had to seek it out.
And I tease you because you're so bubbly. And I say you're Tigger.
I don't feel like I'm bubbly in this moment right now.
But,
yeah.
So your mom and dad both came over from Greece.
My father came first, and then my mother came down the line with my sisters.
So your sisters were born in Greece.
Correct, yeah.
And why did they come to America?
I think, honestly, for my mom, it was all about family unity. She ended up being forced to marry my father. It wasn't her choice. So you follow your husband, and he was, again, not a good person before he left. I don't know the time frame of how long they were apart, but she eventually came and said, you're my husband, you're my, the father of our children. We need to all be together. He was not a good person. Actually, I will say quite evil.
Yeah, and I want to go there.
Yeah.
Why was she forced to marry him?
Back then, he, even being seen talking to a man, if you're talking to him, then it's like automatically you have to marry him. And she was actually beaten by her brothers and her family members because he went around gossiping around the villages. I mean, they were both from 2 villages apart, a mountain in between. But the talk was he was telling everybody that he had been with my mother. And back then, think about that. That was way back. You can't, it's like, nope, now you got to marry him. Even though it wasn't true, my mom wanted nothing to do with him. She was forced and wasn't able to pick her own partner in life, which I can't even imagine being in that position. So it was one thing after another. I mean, she had hard times. And by 11 years old, she was in jail. They had a war going on and there were things, their village was taken over. So by 11 years old, that was the last time she was in school. She hasn't been to school. So it amazes me to see how far she came and to be able to raise us in the States on her own with nothing, no one, and not even the education.
Yeah.
How she did it is amazing to me. And so as I was going on with my process in my life, I would always think, okay, as much as I think this may be tough or this is difficult, compared to my mom, this is trivial.
Yeah.
She went through so much that would give me the strength to keep going because I had nothing to complain about. I didn't have those situations. So thank God for my mother and saying, she always taught us that you just keep powering through, you just keep going and you figure it out. There's no way around it. You can't wait for somebody to take care of you and make it happen. So I feel like I still have that in me. I'm married to somebody that is a complete opposite of my father, and I still am very independent. Like I never want to lose that. And that's what I got from my mom, and thank goodness for my mom. Thank God.
Yeah. You said something a minute ago that was so stunning, and you just kept talking, which I think we all do when we are saying the biggest, hardest thing and we just want to run past it.
Yes.
We're going to put it out there, but we're not going to really look at it.
Right.
So your dad beat your mom so brutally while she was pregnant with you that she was hospitalized?
Yes.
So,
and it wasn't the first time.
I think I remember that he beat her because she was having a girl.
Correct. He didn't want any girls, and he continuously had girls, which is so ironic.
So your dad was trying to kill you before you were born?
Pretty much. I think he was trying to kill all of us. But yes, basically, yes.
So how old were you when you knew that story?
Feel like I honestly don't know the exact age, but I was pretty young, probably somewhere between 9, 11, somewhere in there. I would hear my mom talking with her friends, and I would hear stories along the way. And honestly, I would get bits and pieces. And I did meet him a few times, and I remember the first time I met him I was 4 years old, and I just had the worst feeling inside. I didn't know who he was, but everything inside me screamed. And he actually came up to me. He's like, "Do you know who I am?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "I'm your father." And I was like, "Mom, this man says he's my father." And I didn't know any better or any different. A lot of people were like, "Oh, what was it like being without your father?" I'm like, well, I grew up my whole life with just my mom. So I felt like I didn't know what the difference was because my mom gave us everything. She was the mom and dad to me. But over time, I did grow up and learn and see and hear and dealt with him personally, and even had our own physical altercations. So everything I had heard about him, I knew was true. I saw.
What did that feel like when you began to understand? I mean, that's one of those things that could rock you to your core to go, I was so unwanted. He tried to kill me before I could even be born. You could go into that dark place, and it had to sit inside you somewhere, or you could go, I was meant to be here.
I felt more like I was meant to be here because my mom always was good about, you know, taking care of her girls, her kids. So I didn't feel unwanted. I just knew this person was bad and he didn't want me. But there was anger, of course, growing up when I would encounter him, and it wasn't often. But in knowing what he did, I was more angry growing up. I was really angry at what he did to her, knowing what he did to her.
So you were such a protector of her
So much.
that your anger was directed at him for what he did to her more
Yeah.
than what he tried to do to you.
I didn't look at it that way. Right. It's exactly how it was because I didn't look at it. It was, okay, he didn't want me or got rid of me or tried to get rid of me. I didn't look at it in those terms. I just thought, how could you put somebody through something like that? How could you just beat somebody that severely where she was unrecognizable?
And he threw her down the stairs.
Actually, no, he didn't throw her down the stairs. I know there was a time my sister found her in the closet where he was trying to choke her out and kill her. And there were actually other people in the house that saw, like there was a repair guy in the house at the time, two Greek guys that happened to be, and the one guy went to step in and the other guy held him back and said, "This is none of our business," and pushed the other gentleman back. So they didn't help. And then the police ended up coming and they didn't do anything because it was a different time and he was able to get away with it repeatedly.
I want to throw up right now.
And then he fled the country too. Then he went to Greece and has been living there since. So it's really sad. And it again, when I think about what she went through, I feel more anger than anything else. And then sadness for my sisters for what they had to see. And it's interesting because I see my sisters, one chose a man just like my father.
Yeah.
And the other sister had a really good man in her life. And that affected my life as well because having these two, we didn't have my father, but then my brother-in-law tried taking over as he was the man of the house. And the abuse continued from him. So it was interesting and tough.
Physical and verbal abuse from your brother-in-law
Oh,
as
yeah.
well?
Yes, both. And he would play mind games and he would just do, just awful things to everyone. It didn't matter who. There was just havoc in the house. Wasn't a happy moment where if he came around, it was just all bad. It could be a holiday, a birthday. He would find a way to just
Hijack.
ruin it. And so the abuse continued. I mean, I remember one time when he attacked me, my two sisters had to jump him as I was fighting back because it was just, and I can't remember. I think I must have been about 13 at that time. And I remember going to school with a big mark across my face. And I couldn't talk about it to anybody. You didn't talk about these things publicly. So it was like you're constantly hiding everything that's happening. I feel like people could tell or had an idea that there were things happening, but you couldn't talk about it.
Do you think it was different? And I don't know this. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Do you think it was different because you were in a predominantly Greek community and that was more of a way of life that men always, had kind of the last say, had the right over the woman?
Yes, and that was. I remember growing up where we couldn't talk about. My mom was the only divorced woman in the neighborhood, so people were not very kind to my mother because we were poor. And she was on her own. She didn't have a man in her life. And everybody else was still together as a family, whether it was a good relationship or not, they stayed together. We were the only divorced family in the neighborhood. And people were not so kind. I remember one guy broke up with my sister because his mother told him, "You cannot date her. She comes from a divorced family." And it's heartbreaking. It's mind-boggling that was the way it was.
I just wonder if it would have felt differently in school if you had been, in a more mixed neighborhood where there might have been other value systems where somebody would write, "Hey, you don't have to take this,"
Yeah, I've thought about that many times. I have. But yeah, it was what it was. But I think everybody was, like I said, it felt like a village more than a big city because everybody knew everybody's business. Everybody somehow would, or there was gossip. There was always talk. So that was tough. And I really wanted to get away from all that. That was another big thing for me where I was like, there's got to be more to this than sticking to this. Like I just saw everybody going down the same path and
Staying there.
getting married, having kids, and
Really,
which is great if that's what you want. But I felt like I needed something different, something more. There was just something inside me where, maybe I got.
survivor's instinct,
So that's what eventually I did.
the survivor's strength. Just one last question. I won't make you stay in this forever.
That's okay.
We'll get on to the.
This is interesting because this is something I never talked about publicly either. So this is definitely different for me. I only talk about this with my friends and family. But I feel at this point, it's amazing how what you don't deal with at a younger age, they say the circle of life. Well, it's been coming back up all these years later. So I feel like I'm a different person. There's a reason everything came back around. It's time for me to be open and honest. And I don't like feeling like I did something wrong because I didn't. But as a kid, you were made to feel like you couldn't talk about it. It had to be secretive and you couldn't talk about it because what would people think? Like somehow it was your fault that you're getting abused.
Yeah.
Which is, again, mind-boggling to me. And I couldn't understand it. And I was always like, we need to tell the truth. We need to be open. And my whole family was like, pipe down. Like, let's not be crazy. Just keep certain things to yourself. But now my mom is gone. My sister's kids are older. I was very protective of her kids. They're older. So I feel like it's time for me to talk about it, to deal with it, to protect myself in a different way. I've taken care of everybody else. I feel like it's time for me to take care of myself. And I feel like that's why things kept coming up as of the last few years, why it all came around. I think when you're not dealing with certain things, they come back one way or another. It could be 30 years later, it could be 10 years later. And it has been 30 years, and it's all come full circle. But I've experienced more. I'm a different person. And I just try to understand everything in a different way. That anger isn't there that I had as a kid. So I feel like it's time, and I think it's good to talk about.
So what would you say, being here now and being willing to be really vulnerable about just one of the most horrific stories of abuse, what would you say to someone else if you knew they had been through something like that?
Whether they've talked about it to somebody or not, my first thing is you need to talk to somebody. And there were times I did talk to somebody and things, there were people that knew, and then there were people that didn't know that I did talk to that I thought as adults it could help, that didn't. It was the opposite effect.
So you didn't get the help you went for.
When I asked.
Which that's one more betrayal.
Yes. Even at school, they did see, like the principal, certain teachers, they knew something was going on, but instead of dealing with it, everybody chose to ignore it.
No help came.
So I feel like I'm hopeful for people now at this day and age that they can get the help. And even if you get the rejection or not get the protection from somebody, you just have to keep going to find the person that can maybe help.
You said something interesting a minute ago. You said, I need to protect myself. What are you protecting yourself from?
From these people that are still around trying to still do bad.
Your father?
My father I haven't dealt with at this point because we have no contact at all. I was able to let that go a long time. The last encounter, I just knew he would never change, and he is just who he is. The best thing I did was walk away from him because there were things he said. There were just no child should have to hear. And I was at this point in my 20s, but I was like, you're never going to change. You're just going to be this evil human being. And there's no point in reasoning with somebody that is just that bad. So sometimes you do need to walk away for your own sanity and your own goodness.
And that is fighting.
Yes, that in a different way, I guess. Yeah. My brother-in-law, that's been circling back, my ex-brother-in-law. And that I want to deal with because that's somebody that he's still who he is. And I wonder, how many other people has he done certain things to? How many other people has he hurt? There's a lot of things that I know about he's done, but how many others know, and why hasn't he been caught yet? So I'm hopeful that the truth will surface.
Yeah, there's so much in your story that I have a million questions. But let's go back to a couple of things you just touched on. So your last encounter with your father, you were in your 20s,
Correct.
and he was very abusive to you verbally.
Yes. And physically, not the last time, but physically years back, we literally had a fist fight. He and my uncle attacked me in the middle of the street, where one held me by my arm and the other one just punched me. And I punched back. I fought back. I got into an argument with them, and I hadn't seen my father in years, but I got into an argument with them because they were calling my mom names, saying really horrible things about my mother.
And you
My mother, who took care of me and did everything for me. And then my one sister, who was not married, and she should be married by a certain age. And they were praising my sister, who was with somebody who was just like my father. They were praising her. And I fought back. I was like, she's with somebody who's as evil as you are, and you're praising her. So, and she had kids, and that was the other. I was like, she shouldn't have these kids around him. She shouldn't have had kids to begin with, being with somebody like this. But she does. You protect her children. So I couldn't understand just everybody's thought process. And my father was like, so what's the big deal? Because he had heard that my brother-in-law was abusive with me. My father is like, so what's the big deal? I heard, I know. He's like, so what's the problem? Because, yeah, that's just the mindset.
Okay, so two things.
Yeah, it was a lot.
First of all, how old were you when this fight happened?
I was 18.
You're 18.
I was 8, and my uncle was like 6'7". He was a big dude.
And you were in Greece.
And I was in Greece. It was my first night there for 2 months. And I was with my uncle, who, before my father showed up, was like, you should take your father for everything he's got. You should blah, 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 do this, do that. And I was like, I've been doing fine on my own. I don't need him in any way. He ended up calling him, inviting him over. And this is my mom's brother. So I was just taken aback when my father showed up. And all of a sudden, my uncle changed his tune and started coming at me and attacking me with my father. And they're going off, they were saying all kinds of things. And I ended up, my father left. My uncle and I continued to just go at it. My cousin was there, a female cousin. They ended up attacking me in the house. My cousin and my uncle attacked me. And I ended up, we were by the balcony, and there were some people outside that heard and saw everything. I grabbed my bag and I took off. These people ended up helping me. And they were willing to help me, where they invited me to their home. And I was like, well, I don't know you. It's my first night in Greece. I'm just going to go somewhere and sit and hang out until morning. I don't have anybody to, hang out. It was late at night at this point. And I said, I just want to wait. And they're like, we'll wait with you. They were so kind. And I always look at that. For as bad as there is in this world, there is good. It's a matter of finding those people, or that they find you.
So I have to go back again. I promise I won't keep.
No, it's
but your brother-in-law abused you.
Yeah.
What did he do?
First time he tried to do something was when I was 11 years old. I was sleeping, came into a room. Mind you, family members were in the house. And I found out later he tried drugging my mother. And I woke up and his hands were off me all of a sudden. Like I pushed back, and I was like, what was happening? I was in my sleep, so I didn't know what was happening. He got away from me, but he did things along the way up until, and I swore to myself, if anything ever happened again, I would go to the police. And time went on, and he would do things like he was grooming me. I didn't know that at the time. You learn these things later in life.
Sure.
But he would do things, and again, he played a lot of mind games. And then we found out over time that he was bragging to people about things as if I wanted him. I was a kid. And at 16, he tried again. and I was in my sleep again. And when I woke up, everybody was in the house sleeping. And I remember I had summer school, and I was dating somebody. I was 16. I called him up. I'm like, you need to pick me up right now. And when he picked me up, I told him I was just so upset. I was bawling. And I'm like, what do I do? I have to do
We
something.
say rape you.
We don't, like, I was in my sleep, and I think he slipped me something, and we had been out. The family was out. It was a big Greek holiday, and we were drinking. My mom was actually at an overnight mass because it was this big Greek holiday. So I remember certain things. I don't know exactly. I don't remember. And I think some of it I had blocked out too.
Sure.
And I ended up going to the police and filing a report. And the police officer actually said to me, "Are you sure you didn't want it?" So that threw me for a loop too. Like, I finally had the nerve to go to somebody to report it, which was so hard. And I had to go to the hospital to do tests in case anything, because we didn't know, we weren't quite sure what. I did find semen next to me. I'm having a hard time even saying that. It's just,
Okay.
yeah, I've never talked about it publicly. So this is definitely, I've talked to my friends, obviously, and my family members. But to have an officer say to you, "Did you want it?" And they said they called him up and asked him, and he said no. And they took his word. And that was the end of that.
But it wasn't, because your father said,
Yeah, he knew. So it was interesting.
I heard about it. What's the big...
I don't know how. And even my uncle said the same thing. And I was like, how did they hear no? And my sister chose not to. She took the kids away from us, basically, and we didn't have a relationship for years. So that was hurtful too. That was more my concern in reporting anything, that I knew they would take. We were very close to my nephew. We were basically raising him. So I felt like if I say anything, they have the power. It's their child. They're take them away from us. And sure enough, that's what happened for years. And
But the messaging you kept getting, when you're over here at 16, you're already trying to create a career by yourself. You had help from one sister. But the messaging you got everywhere was, you don't have any rights. Take what happens to you from these men. It's no big deal. Your father attacks you over it. A police officer says, "You sure you didn't want it?" I mean, the messaging that you got over and over and over. How did you climb out of that?
And I have to go back. The other thing that angered me when the police officer said, "Did you want it?" was he had a hard time believing me, he said, because I wasn't crying. I was so angry. And I was like, well, I've been dealing with this for so many years and crying nonstop. I am really angry now. So, yeah, I did cry about it. I'm just not crying in front of you. Why would I bother going through all these emotions of going to the hospital, being tested for this, being tested for that?
Exactly.
For no reason. So that really just...
So you had no protection.
So it just got me even more angry. Like, I was just angrier and angry, just really fuming at this point, because just nobody believed me. I mean, my one sister did believe me, and she was, and her boyfriend at the time, who was part of our lives for 12 years, he was like the father and brother I never had. He was such a great guy, and we're still close to this day. I thank God for him, because he was so just supportive, and he was one of the people that I could talk to, even though it was really uncomfortable to talk to my sister and her boyfriend. It was hard to have this conversation, even though they knew what was going on, and they were trying their best to be supportive. Nobody knew, this was new to all of us, to deal with something like this. I felt bad for my mom, because, abuse has gone on in our family for so long. My big concern after this was my nephew, and then my sister had a daughter. And so I was concerned about her daughter. And now her daughter's all grown up and he has a granddaughter. And I have found out they lived in the same building, same house. And it's like, you guys all know what he did, right? So how are you allowing a child around him? And I feel like if he was this way with me, how many other people? There has to be. But at the time, I couldn't talk about it. I just had to figure out a way for me to keep going in my life. But it bothers me that all these years, who else did he encounter? Who else did he do this to? Who else is he? It makes me really mad and sad at the same time, but more mad that nobody is thinking about that.
There's no protection.
Yeah, it just so.
So what did you do? I mean, you present as incredibly put together, and truly, deeply a very joyful person. What did you do with all that anger and all that, I mean, abuse, the history of how you came into the world? Where did you go with all that?
I feel like it made me stronger. I felt like the best revenge, they say, is living a good life, doing better. I thought if I stayed mad, if I stayed in this situation, if I stuck around and just dealing with the nonsense that everybody, I feel like misery loves company, and I just wanted no part of it, that I had to find the good. I knew there was good out there, and as I was getting older, I'm like, I have choices. I have a choice to do better for me because I couldn't find that where I was at. As much as, the good people in my family that were trying, it was a tough situation. Everybody was going through their own thing. So I just had to find a way to just put it away and find the joy in life. I didn't want to stay. I feel like, because he even along the way when I was younger would say stuff, knew I wanted to be in entertainment, and would say, who do you think you are, basically, to think you're going to be a fit model, or you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. Like, you can't do it. And I was like, oh yeah, watch me. So I think I had a little bit of that attitude, and I found more peace as I got away and not dealing with us on a daily basis. I was able to put it behind me, and just move forward and just focus and concentrate on myself. And of course, I go back to, I would go back to see my family, like my mom and my sister, and try to, teach them and show them other things. But it was hard going back, because every time I would go back to Chicago, which I'm there all the time, it took years for me to get that feeling, that just gross feeling of there were so many bad things that happened when I was there.
Did you have any tools that helped you move through all of that?
I think just moving forward in the entertainment world and focusing on the business side of it, and I have to say, my job, I find joy in what I do. There are a lot of good times I get to experience. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I get to do different things. I get to travel different places. That helped me so much, because I'm meeting different people. I'm learning different things from different people. So I was able to make the choice of what I wanted in my life and what I didn't want in my life. As a kid, you don't have many choices. You have to rely on the adults.
Because you have to have a place to live and food to eat.
Yeah.
Basically.
And when the adults aren't helping you, and the adults aren't figuring it out and are having a hard time, and then they're the bad adults, it felt good to finally just go, no, this is what I want. This is what I need. This is how I see things. This is how I, want to, live my life. And that, I think that helped me, because I really focused on what I was doing.
Okay, I think this is a good time to take a break. Thank you so much for being with us today. Wow, what an incredible story of some really rough times and a drive to survive. And remember that she's the author of Dream On, Now Deliver. You're going to want to get this book. Join us next week as we continue with Patricia's story and we move into some of the highest times in her life in the entertainment business. Thank you so much for being with us today.